Hey, everyone. Welcome to the CyberHub podcast. James Azar here. We are at Atlanta Tech Park, one of my favorite places to come to in Atlanta. Really is, Robin.
Oh, it's definitely my favorite place. It's my house.
Guys, I'm with Robin Bienfait.
Bienfait.
Bienfait. I've got it right. A legend in the Atlanta, I think in the U.S., in the tech community.
Tech community, yes.
You've been at this for...
don't tell me.
I won't say how long.
So let's just say I'm very experienced in this space.
You've been doing this for a while.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about Atlanta Tech Park before we kind of get into everything else.
So, after my career at AT&T, BlackBerry, and Samsung, I had a chance to go back into the corporate space with another large role and made the decision to do a pivot. I decided that innovation had left the corporation years ago, and now innovation was happening outside of the corporation. And how could I be involved and embrace innovation? So I started my advisory firm, Emnovate, which means embrace innovation. And then as I was doing this work, realized I didn't have a place for these entrepreneurs to either call home or be a member of and create that ecosystem. So I had the opportunity to purchase a building. It's 45,000 square feet. We have 90 plus entrepreneurs that are in tech acceleration. And we are a global innovation center. So some of my members don't physically live in Atlanta. They're global. They can be anywhere around the world. And I continue to help consult with them, advise them, match them up with other technologies that would actually help elevate their revenue growth. And I find that I'm having more fun. So it is true, innovation is left the corporation. And not that the corporate should be scared, they just need to know how to engage.
Well, the whole idea of corporate innovation not being there is more about corporations sustaining and taking less risk because shareholders don't want that risk.
Correct.
And startups being able to go and take that risk and then bring that risk home.
Correct.
And then these big companies come in and buy them. And that's the ecosystem we've developed nowadays.
That is true, the ecosystem. And in some cases, some of the corporates will actually silently invest in some of these startups or tech accelerators and help promote some of their problems and issues through those entrepreneurs.
Well, but that's how you solve problems, right?
Exactly.
As a corporation, your shareholders don't want to see you spend $600 million a year on R&D for maybe something that will or will not work.
Yeah, you can almost think that the R&D shop has left the corporation.
It's very interesting. If you look at job postings and you really study them, you notice that the title of VP R&D almost doesn't exist in corporations anymore.
Right. And a lot of that R&D was sourced not by only having an R&D shop, but having an affiliation with some
a university,
academia.
Right?
Yeah. So I still have a very tight affiliation both to Georgia Tech and Emory, as well as Kennesaw State and Georgia State. So we try to bring all the local university elements to play.
We got to get you with UNG. They have the #1 cyber program in the country.
We do have the connection there, but we're not working as strongly with them. We get more interns coming from these other operatives than other academias than we do UGA.
Well, I'm talking about UNG, University of North Georgia.
Oh, of North Georgia. No,
University of North Georgia has the #1 cybersecurity program in the country.
So I do not have connection with them. I'm connected also with this cyber program that's out of NYU.
We'll have to connect you with Dr. Payne and Ash at UNG because they just won the NSA Codebreaker Challenge.
Congratulations. That's fantastic news.
And
because I really see Georgia.
They spanked Georgia Tech.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it was just 100 and
I'm sure some of my Georgia Tech guys wouldn't like that very much.
170,000 point differential.
Oh,
Georgia
wow.
Tech came in second place, but the difference between first and second place, the gap was 170,000 points.
Well, it just ups the bar, but it shows you that Georgia is going to become the CyberHub for talent.
I'd hope so. As the CyberHub podcast, I want Georgia to be the CyberHub. So, Robin, I'm really excited because, we host CyberHub Summit. You guys do a Cyber FinTech Challenge, and this year we're coming together.
And that's exciting for us because the more the merrier.
Yes, and it's a blast. It's going to be great. So for those who've seen the ads, we've kind of planned it for October. But for people who have been watching what's going on lately.
With all the other stuff in the air.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the air now.
Yeah.
We're moving it to March.
Targeting 2 cyber events a year. One is a Cyber Health Tech and one is a Cyber FinTech.
Right.
And the Cyber Health Tech is going to be a hybrid event that happens August 6th. So that was kind of our test of this virus affecting people actually congregating. And we're finding that it's effective, but it's not as great as we would like it to be. So as we move towards the Cyber FinTech, I really like the idea of us doing and launching some virtual capability.
Right, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing 2 virtual events a month, 2 in September, 2 in October, 2 in November, 2 in December, 2 in January, 2 in February, and then in March, people can come together. The idea is to lead up, create, and really build the community virtually. We all miss being in person. You and I are sitting in person without our masks, although my mask is right here.
But we're at distance, so we all keeping the social distance.
We are at distance, and I did sanitize this stuff before.
Well, the good thing about the park is we are very spacious and allows for us to have the social distance. We have somebody here that's cleaning and disinfecting at all times in real time.
And you've got disinfectants and hand sanitizers on
everywhere.
It's amazing. It's better than an airport. I mean, I was flying back from Israel and finding the hand sanitizing stations at the airports in Newark was almost impossible. They didn't have them. They don't exist. And I'm like, you've got people landing into the country.
Yes.
How do you not have this?
That's a question for New Jersey.
That is a question for, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut both equate to about 45% of the human loss in COVID-19. So,
and you would think with that significant set of numbers, they would be more due diligence or hypervigilance.
You would hope. Mm-hmm. That's not always the case.
No.
That's not always the case. So we look at our Cyber FinTech event, which is going to be absolutely great because you're hosting your famous Cio Ciso Luncheon.
Correct.
So what's that like?
So I typically, every other month, host with the 250,
I'll ask you to bring the mic just slightly closer.
The 250 CISOs and CIOs and CTOs that are in the area with the larger population. I think it's about 5,000 plus.
Uh-huh.
It's an open invitation. It's a first come, first serve. So that means I only have 18 seats at the round table because once you get a little bit beyond 18, then it's very hard to have a dialogue. So my monthly, every other month event is this round table. We bring up, for the first half of the session, we bring up some new technology or new learning that I feel that is important for them to hear. And then the second half of the session is how do I help groom our CIOs, our CTOs, and CISOs for a board assignment. I think it's very important to get technologists on boards so that they can help guide the board in what they need to be doing, not just beyond business, but to enable the business. And I have found that there's such a gap of having technologists on a board that there's a huge gap and miss opportunity. So I'm trying to help bridge that gap.
Yeah, there is a tremendous gap between how CISOs report to boards and how they don't. In fact, just this week, a few days ago, I released a Tech Corner episode just like this one with Roger Grimes. And I don't know if you know Roger, 30-year veteran of cyber, written 12 books.
Yeah.
He works for KnowBe4 now, but he's a data-driven guy. And our talk centered all around CISO KPIs and industry KPIs. And how come there's no standard? So in marketing, there's a standard. In sales, there's standard. In finance, there's a standard. In technology, there's a standard. In R&D, there's a standard. In DevOps, there's a standard. But security doesn't have one.
And it should. And there are certain KPIs that need to be tracked and seen at the board level. We actually were trying to use the NIST framework to put that structure together, which I think would be a good start. but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
I think the NIST CSF has a lot of advantages, but I feel like the NIST CSF is almost a best practice, and NIST is a combination of so many different things. Right. I think, like, I'm a personal believer in the top 20 controls, in the CIS 20, right? If you do the CIS 20, if you do the top 7 or 8 right, you're
in a good solid space.
Right. I mean, one of the things we talked about was when you don't have the right KPIs, you've got CISOs spending money on the next shiny box, but really their blocking and tackling isn't there for the traditional cyber stuff. And we were talking about it before we started this podcast.
Correct.
And you know, talking about, you know, some of the CISO projects I'm working on, and how there's a challenge in maturity in some organization in terms of identifying when do you start security, and then how do you start security, and what do you do and what don't you do. And there's data-driven points and pieces of decision making that every organization takes into place, and yet in security that doesn't exist.
And it needs to get in there fast. And I would tell you, a lot of the CISOs actually know what they should be measuring, but they get pulled around by the shiny objects that come up either at the management level or at the board level.
Well, they get pulled around from, you know, the CISO's presentation never goes unfiltered to the board.
Yes, that's true.
It typically goes to the CIO or whoever he directly reports to, general counsel, CIO, then it goes to the CEO.
Or the CFO,
which
is the wrong place.
Right, and then it gets watered down, and they're like, yeah, don't talk to the board about this, don't talk to the board about this. You could talk about expand about this, keep it simple, and answer their questions and move along.
But see, isn't that important? And so since I sit on several boards, being the person that can actually look at a report and know what's missing, I can then ask the credible challenge of where is this and how are we doing in that, even though it's not in the report.
Right. But how many boards have someone like you on them?
Very few.
Correct.
And that's what we've got to fix, because then you don't get the filtering if you get that at the board level.
Well,
so board composition is imperative that there's a technologist at the table.
Well, I think there's a difference between a technologist and a security guy.
Well, and maybe I use it in a broader sense. I'm both a technologist
and a security person. and I'm very similar to that, where I am a security guy and a technologist.
But here's the funny thing is they hired me for the technologist, and the security guy of me just slips in, because I think sometimes the environment might be a little bit challenged having a security person at the table.
Yeah. Well, and let's be real, the OG original security people aren't exactly outward facing guys.
Exactly.
Which was the original challenge with security, right? Security is where it's at today because the original people that were in security didn't quite comprehend how to speak board language or executive language. And so now this new generation of security folks that are coming through the ranks, the younger CISOs, the younger CIOs, the younger technologists understand how to talk a little bit more security, but security is also a lot more mainstream today.
Yes,
if you think of like all major technology publications, all have a security section now. That wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago.
But isn't that much better?
Well, depends.
It's improved.
Well, so I will say yes and no, and I'll tell you why. So yes, in the fact that yes, it's much improved, but no, in the fact that they write stories that are just so foolish sometimes.
Yes,
with very bad conclusions.
Right, and that detracts from what really needs to be done.
Correct.
And thought about. And so I host also twice a year something called an Unplugged event. And this is allowing CISOs to come to the table to share those stories of, I don't want to say, oh, ain't it awful, but to learn from each other's stories of how they would better communicate and or better formulate their plans and what they're trying to address for not only their company, but the employees within the company.
Yeah. I like the idea of the Unplugged event. I do those on our CISO Talk podcast, right? We'll have that conversation and we'll talk about, one thing, that you can laugh off completely. I've been in board meetings where a badly written article by a vendor has gotten me getting 21 questions from a board member, and I try to explain to that person, like, first let's explore who wrote this.
Yes. And they don't want to have that dialogue.
No, they're like, they read this and it was in a
and
Forbes.
It has to be true.
Well, they read it and it's in a publication they trust, right? A Forbes, a Fortune magazine, a Wired, whatever the case may be. And so they go, well, they wouldn't publish something like that. And I'm like, Mr. Board Member, yes, they would. It's called PR and PR agencies.
PR agencies, and sometimes you pay to publish.
Most of the times you're paying to publish.
They're not just going out and getting the best article or vetting the article. And maybe they shouldn't, because it does stir the dialogue.
Well, I think so we go into a deeper problem here. We can dig into that deeper problem,
Yes.
and let's for a second. The problem with that is we all want free content.
Yes.
So if users all paid $2 a month, or if there was a major subscription that you paid, kind of like how Apple Music goes, right? $15 a month, but you can listen to all the music you want in the Apple Music library.
All you can eat.
So if there was a $15 a month subscription that allowed you to go and listen to or read your articles, the journalists and the reporters would be more honest with their reporting, because they wouldn't have that PR aspect to it.
They wouldn't have the PR aspect, but wouldn't they? So I've gotten bitten before with speaking with a reporter at an event down in Australia. And it was sort of one of those things. They were supposed to be friendly. And at the end of the day, they were just trying to make sensational news, because they still wanted to be able to say, out of all the articles that were written, they got the most eyeballs.
So, again, so that goes back to my original idea, right? The way online publications make money is through ads, right? CTAs, click-through rates, CPAs, whatever they call them nowadays. My marketing brain's a little fried today. But so if you didn't have to worry about that, if you didn't have to worry about how many eyes saw your article for your advertisers, but rather just for your content, then the honest journalists would be more inclined to not sensationalize a story, but really give facts.
Yeah, but then see, you could also do and add an element to where those of us that read the article can vote that the article was relevant, good, bad.
Well, Facebook kind of had that idea early on, right? And now that went away. I mean, I'll tell you, with my Apple newsfeed, like, I've been trying for ages to get rid of the New York Times and CNN from my feed, and the Washington Post, because I'm like, they're former media establishments. They're just now opinion pieces for the woke.
Right.
And so I can't get rid of them.
They won't let you turn them off?
No.
Oh.
Like, I've unfollowed. I don't want to see anything from CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. Don't want to see it. Don't care what their headline says. I'm not going to read it. Not going to click through it. They still shows up on my feed through, like, Apple News app. So I'm almost to the point where I'm going to install the Apple News app.
So they're paid to push. Yeah.
You almost think so. I mean, Apple is on its news app in their quarterly reports. They're very limited in how they describe how they make money off their own apps. They just combine them all together. Anything outside of music. So on music, they say, hey, we make, 400 million a quarter, but on, everything else, they'll say, oh, everything else is a combined 400 million. Or like, how are you making 400 million from your own apps? Like, what data are you selling? Right? Like,
exactly.
what are you pushing through?
What are you doing in the back? Yeah.
Right. Like, what are you pushing through? And no offense to Apple, I get it. But, Tim Cook did come out and say, hey, we're a hardware company. We're not a software company. We don't want to sell user data.
But they're selling data all the time.
Everyone is. I have a podcast called Goodbye Privacy. It's my most popular podcast. That podcast has 25 to 30,000 downloads an episode.
Wow.
Right? And in my first season, that's all we spoke about. We did a whole episode on data brokers, $150 billion a year industry. Companies you'd never hear of, but companies that sometimes make more money than some of the brand names you know.
Because they're getting access to the data.
Right. They're getting access to the data.
And don't you believe at some point in time we've got to take back our data because it's my data?
So, you know, we're in the midst of a presidential election. We're not going to get political, but we will get to the idea of how no one is really talking about the real issues, right? And the real issue around it isn't, you know, COVID's very serious and we should take it seriously. What China's doing should be taken seriously.
Yes.
We have a lot of problems with China, and we need to stand up to China. We don't need to negotiate with China. We need to break their legs while we still can before they become way too powerful for us to break their legs. Personally, as a former veteran, that's what I think we should be doing. Not encouraging war, but at the same time, I'm saying we're their largest customer, and when a largest customer boycotts you, it brings you down to your knees. It destroys your economy.
And we need to make sure there's balance
I agree.
and fairness
Well,
as best we can.
as we record, I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff, but there's a wanted person for espionage hiding in the Chinese embassy, the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. And so part of the reason why we just shut down their consulate in Houston is part of that pressure campaign to be like, you're not, you know, that's not going to be a Snowden, not a Snowden, the guy from WikiLeaks situation.
Oh, yes. Right.
She's not going to be in there for 8 to 10 years. We will shut it down. You will have to leave. And when she walks out, she will be arrested and apprehended by federal law enforcement officials.
And why aren't they being cooperative?
Because it's China.
Yeah. But that's the question. They should be cooperative.
But they're not. China's been stealing our country's IP for 20 some odd years. They do that through our universities.
They do it through the universities. They do it through actually even buying
Companies
that have certain IP.
So they, a really big story when I was in Israel, I was at the INCD, the Israeli National Cyber Directorate. And one of my questions to them at the time in one of our interviews was around the Chinese buying equity in the Haifa port. Now, the port of Haifa is where our naval destroyers park,
Right.
where all of the Israeli Navy ships are predominantly. So the Chinese have bought equity in the shipping portion of that seaport, yet U.S. naval carriers and destroyers, and so do Israeli ones and German and others, all park there.
Mm-hmm.
So the Israeli government is now, you know, looking at their involvement in that seaport seriously, and they could invoke a national security article and kick him out, essentially. And that might be something they'll have to do. I think the Israelis are waiting until November to decide whether or not they do that.
But see, this is where we need to have our eyes wide open, that when a country comes in to purchase certain things, if you can't build it, then you try to buy it.
Right. Well, I mean, you look at that from a cyber fintech perspective, right? You go through, you and I both probably have been through a ton of incubators,
Yes.
and we speak to a lot of different startups in the fintech and in the cyber. You know, I'm a veteran of a fintech company that I sold, and so there are aspects of where you see the Chinese coming in. I've never trusted the Chinese, so whenever they tried to come and engage with us, it was always very superficial, never really going into a lot of detail, always kind of keeping it at a respectful but arm length manner, almost like COVID-19. 6 feet away, social distancing, very respectful, but I'm wearing a mask and I'm sanitizing, right? And I'm not really going to give you everything you want to know, right?
Just enough to operate, maybe.
Well, just enough so that you think you're getting something, but you're really not.
Okay.
But I can tell you that in a bunch of the other incubators that I've been at, you know, all over the world, the Chinese have a very active investment arm in a lot of them. They're watching these companies, and so they're known to want to go after financial systems. They thrive off of that. I mean, that's kind of their MO to begin with, and so there's a lot of danger to that. And as a CISO, it makes me extremely nervous because part of my role is to protect my company's IP.
Protect your company as well as your country. And so I believe in a lot of cases, being a citizen of the United States, I feel like I have an obligation to make sure that if there are things that are known that can be shared, that we can learn and leverage amongst the other CISOs, that we have an environment to do that.
So last summer, I took a group of 10 CISOs to Israel for Tel Aviv University Cyber Week. And we didn't see any vendors, but we did spend 5 days in Israel, And we met with other CISOs from Israel's banks, critical infrastructure to INCD, the Israeli government. We've met with different organizations, fintech companies and whatnot in Israel, all CISO meetings. And the idea was, can we create an information sharing, an international global information sharing relationship between the CISOs?
And I would hope the answer came out as yes.
The answer is very much yes.
And it's very much needed.
There needs to be more of it, right? I mean, I think the problem we have today as CISOs, and I try with my CISO talk to bridge that gap, right? A little bit with the podcast, but even on a podcast, we can't speak as frank as we'd like to.
Correct.
Because we don't know who's listening.
Right.
I can tell you that my website gets about 2,000 hits a day from Russia and China.
Yeah. So I stay very low key, and that's why I hold a in-person event with the roundtable and the Unplugged.
And it's very difficult to do that in the age of
Yes.
COVID, right?
Correct.
And so our hope is that with being able to do virtual events to where we're able to more talk about cyber FinTech technology and cyber in general with some of the event sponsors, and we've already got 2 supporters, InterSystems and OneTrust.
Right.
And so we're very excited and grateful for their support. They've supported this event already before its inception. They've already kind of signed on and supported this event. So we're very thankful to them. But I think there's a lot more that we need to do in an in-person activity, as well as just understanding the balance of power.
Yes. The full landscape. And some of those conversations can't be had in a virtual way.
No, they can't. I mean, even when you get on a Google Meet or a WebEx with other people, the lack of being able to read body language, the idea of typically 2 people dominating a conversation rather than in a room of 15, 20, you can see he has something to say and you can typically call on that person.
Exactly.
It's much more difficult to do that virtually.
And that's why I like my roundtable, because I know the people personally, and I know where some of the thinking is. So if I'm still doing my little virtual roundtable, I call out certain folks.
Right.
And it makes it a little easier because there's a relationship already there. We still have to be a little guarded in a virtual environment for those that may be listening. But in my little video roundtables, there's a lot of protection that we can put in play so that those conversations are just there during the virtual event and not stored and or shared inappropriately.
There's a lot that can be done. I feel like people, though, are more reserved online no matter what you put in place.
No matter what you can do, and no matter how much you can safeguard.
Well, because I think anyone who's in security realizes that any one thing you say or do, you never know where it's going to end up.
Right. I always tell people, if you write it down and or somebody prints it, anything you say or do can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Well, I mean, even if you look at today, things that people tweet 10 years ago are coming back to haunt them, right?
Yes. And a lot of it taken out of context.
A lot of it is taken out of context. And in security and in the corporate world today, you can't afford to be taken out of context. It's your job. It's your livelihood. And CISOs already have a hard enough job to begin with, right? You're the first one on the chopping block when something bad happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the way that maybe the business sees it. If something bad happens, you're the one that they have to show to their customer set. The CISO wasn't doing their job, so I took them out. And I got a new CISO. And I'm like, okay, so if the life expectancy of a CISO in any particular corporate job is 18 to 24 months, how are they going to ever get anything done? They're just going to be spending their whole time covering their rear end.
Well, they're going to be putting out fires.
Yeah,
fires. They're never planning ahead. They're reacting.
And only checking the boxes on those things that says, oh, do you have this? And they can check the box. But are they really putting in play the right security policy and capability? Or are they just checking the box because that's the one everybody else uses?
It's a predominantly box-checking venture, right? It's predominantly that. The challenge you have is frequently as CISO, and I can tell you in my virtual CISO roles today, right, kind of sharing something is you have to set the proper expectation. I will not take a virtual CISO role where I'm not reporting to the CEO. I won't do it.
Right.
Won't do it. If someone says, hey, I'm the CTO, I want to hire you to work for me, I go, who do you report to? The CEO. If your CEO is part of this conversation, great. If not, then I can't do it. I go, because I'm going to come to you, you're going to go up, and then I'm going to end up taking the shaft for all of this.
Right.
And it's just not worth it. It's really not worth it. If you can't work directly with the CEO and the decision makers, then there's no point of you taking the virtual CISO role. Not a CISO role within an enterprise where obviously hierarchy and so forth. I like to call myself the startup CISO. I've got a Twitter handle that says the startup CISO. And it's my, I just gave away my secret. No one knows it's me. So
You should have not done that.
well, it doesn't matter. People, I mean, I say I cut my hair so short because I get gray hairs because I take on the challenge of working with startups that, you know, don't have the big budgets for security.
But it's those startups that are really going to be the ones that grow into those larger corporations. And wouldn't it be lovely to get those things fixed
Early on.
and it be part of their DNA as
Right.
opposed to something that's added on later or painted over?
Correct. And that's one of the things I really do enjoy is when you're meeting with startups and as they go after enterprise business, I always get the call like, we just had, the super excited meeting. Like, we just met with this enterprise company and they're really hot. And now we got to go through a security due diligence. And I'm like,
Okay, you're done.
well, no, I never tell, I'd never say you're done. I say, okay, now we got to get ready for that.
Now there's some work to do.
Right, but we've already done a lot of that work because if you do like I said, if you do the top 6, 7 in the CIS top 20 to begin with as your best practice, you can pretty much clear their initial due diligence. And the other part is you put a CISO and another CISO on the phone in that process, and I talk to my counterpart at that company and I go, hey, these are the things we're working on. Obviously, we're a startup. Funds are a little bit limited. These are the things in our roadmap. And I've yet to be turned down.
They know you're in progress and understand.
And they want to support the startup.
Right.
Because the business wants, if it's a fintech company, the business wants to see it, wants its product. If it's, whatever it is, people want to, the business piece looks at this and goes, this is a great vendor that can really help our organization.
Right, because it gives them new paths to revenue.
Right, and the security folks don't want to always say no. And a lot of times, I always tell people, like, just get 2 CISOs on the phone in the due diligence process. Let the forms come in, but leave the forms out. Let the forms be part of a conversation and not the requisite for the deal.
Okay.
Because the form can always, the due diligence sheet, the SOC 2 report, the pen testing reports, all that information is side noted in a conversation with someone. Because what a report can't explain, or a SOC 2 report, you've done 3 of them, you're giving me your best one. Because your first 2, I'd probably not want to do business with you if I looked at them. Same thing with your pen testing report.
Exactly. Your pen testing report would also need some additional work. The good news is, though, at least you're thinking about it and you've got it on the roadmap.
Well, I can tell you that in a lot of cases where I've been doing due diligence on other people who want to work within the organizations I'm with, I look at what they're doing and kind of and I speak to their security folks and I go, all right, there's a little bit of risk here, but we can always leverage that in a contract. We can always set some milestones for it. We can always reevaluate it. We can, do stuff on the business side of it in order to continue the business relationship while ensuring that they continue to enhance their security. Now, if there's a critical concern, that's a whole different thing.
Right. But the rest of it can usually be worked through.
Indeed. Folks, so I'm with Robin. We're going to do a lot more of these. Don't you worry. I know we can probably have this conversation for another 2 hours and it still be...
And there's a lot of topics to cover, so we might go off on a lot of rabbit.
We would go down a bunch of rabbit holes. We would. But that's it for us here for this specific Tech Corner. I'll have more with Robin as we'll do another one next month, and then we'll be doing these probably monthly leading up to our Cyber FinTech event, which I'm really excited about.
So am I, because I think this is going to be the hub.
I agree. And you can get a lot more details by going to atlantatechpark.com or cyberhubsummit.com. where you can see more information about the events. Again, we're postponing the event from October 26th to the 28th to March 8th through the 10th, which is going to be a great period of time, folks. It's spring, and if you haven't been to this facility, we have an amazing outdoor area here that's probably going to be rocking in March, because it'll be just the perfect weather outside. We can have an outdoor cocktail party. People can really have a good time.
We did that one time before, and it was fabulous. Put the bar outside. Let people just mingle outside, have the space they wanted.
Maybe bring shorts. We'll have water guns, you know. I mean,
we had drone racing, actually.
Drone racing is a lot of fun. And
the fun thing is we get some smaller ones for people that have never done and flown a drone, so there's a lot of drone activity.
It is. So Atlanta Tech Park, folks, here in Peachtree Corners, and Peachtree Corners is one of those innovative cities in Georgia. Really, the city, Brian and his team over there are doing an amazing job in terms of attracting stuff here. So
thank you.
That's it for us here, folks. We'll be back with so much more later. But until then, folks, stay cyber safe.